This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Basket Case Clubs. My name's Michael Connolly and I will be your host on this safari into shitfulness that hopefully will arrive into safety and sustainability on the other side. And joining me as usual is my co-partner in crime, Steve Connolly. Hello, Steve.
Chuckling at the other end of the line regarding your welcome to the safari of shitfulness. That's great. And that is exactly what we're talking today.
So Steve has kept me blissfully ignorant of what we're going to be talking about today. So it's obviously an interesting story and one that will end up as a showcase club at some point. We may not quite be there yet. So this is a contemporary story that Steve's going to share and we'll go through the process. Really, it's from what I know, from what I understand that we're going to be talking about, it really does shine a spotlight on how dumb stuff can happen in clubs and how the little bits of dumb stuff driven by funny internal motivations of individuals can really cause havoc over a long time. That can come to a head sometimes in ways that is not a lot of fun. But from your perspective, our lovely listeners, you get to kind of have a seat in a comfortable couch with some popcorn and some soft drink to say, holy crap, that sounds stupid.
But or you're going to say, gosh, that sounds familiar.
Yeah. And if it doesn't sound familiar, to say, right, that's some stuff that we're not going to get into. So, Steve, what have you got for us?
We are abundantly aware that there are typically three sides to every story. Your side, my side, and the truth. And I've got to disclose that really I've been liaising with really just one side of the membership of this club that we're going to discuss today. And there are inevitably going to be some other perspectives within the club. Even though that's the case, we pride ourselves on impartiality and objectivity. Sure, once we get into our podcast studio, we might fun at people and hang shit on others. But in reality, when we're working with clubs, we do bring that impartiality to the discussion that can often help get through really sticky situations. So we'll be sitting on the fence today. And really the reason that I wanted to share this story is it's the sort of thing that we've seen happen a handful of times, at least over the last 23 odd years. So this sort of nonsense does go on in clubs. And really, as we normally do, we'll kind of finish up the discussion with a few takeaways for people out there in the real world of sport who might be dealing with the same or similar situations to hopefully avoid some of the pain that inevitably comes along with this crap. So we're talking about a golf club. We do a lot of work in golf. We do a lot of work with clubs and regional districts, primarily in Queensland, but also throughout the country. And we're lucky that we've established a really good working relationship with the National Body Golf Australia. And they certainly recognise the need for governance reform in a lot of clubs, because typically, golf clubs do things the same old way that they've, done them for the last, 800 years. So, so often people are very stuck in their ways. Nevertheless, we often come along and discover that, a club's constitution is quite out of date. And we work proactively with a working group to update that document, but also take the opportunity to kind of uncover some of the potentially, stifling practices within their governance model. And often that means reducing, the size of the management committee, which can often be quite large in golf clubs. So, some clubs with which we've worked have had committees of, in the order of 15 people, and that's a lot of cooks in the kitchen.
And do they do that because they're trying to be representative?
Yeah, often that's the case. So there'll be cohorts of membership within a golf club. That might be the juniors, the veterans, the ladies, and so on. And sometimes there'll be representation from those different membership cohorts. There's also then representation from different operational areas. So, there might be a match committee that organises the golf competitions. There might be a house committee that manages the clubhouse activities. There might be a greens committee because it's important that you're maintaining a quality course. And often there'll be representation from those different operational areas on the management committee as well. And you can imagine then that we're getting up to, into the teens in terms of the number of people on a board or committee.
Oh, I thought you were going to say into the teens in the number of hours every frickin' management committee meeting takes.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah.
You've just been through some very specific operational areas of a golf club, and if everyone on that committee needs to have a say about everything that's going on, the greens, if we were to separate it out into probably a better model, that you had a greens committee, by the time they finish talking about all of the stuff that they've got to go through, the people from the house committee have fallen asleep. And then by the time the house committee people have been woken up to talk, the greens committee people are sitting there going, "Oh, can we freaking get home now? Like, I want to get home and watch Married at First Sight. Hurry up, please."
Yeah, or get out on the course and do the stuff that I'm really interested in rather than sitting here listening to what's going on in the clubhouse.
What? You mean play golf?
Yeah. Oh, you mean why we got involved in this club in the first place?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there with some logic.
So yeah, and I should say that increasingly clubs are aware, golf and other clubs are aware that some reform in terms of their governance structure can lead to greater efficiencies. It can mean that those, what you're alluding to there, Mick, that people who are interested in a particular area of operation in a club can, by way of involvement in a subcommittee, can just take care of that operational area and keep the board or management committee informed, but not have to get involved in absolutely every discussion about everything else.
Yeah. And that's a discussion for another day, is the difference between the representative board or committee and the skills-based board.
Ah, good point. Yep. Let's make a note. We'll definitely come back to that because we've got plenty to say on that. So in this club, they did indeed have a little bit of change in terms of their organizational structure. We worked with them in 2019 to write a new constitution, and their previous document was quite outdated, as constitutions often are, not only in the world of golf. And typically that's because people don't get involved in golf clubs to read constitutions. They get involved to play golf.
Well,
so ideally. So we worked with them in 2019. Interestingly, some Bush lawyer involvement towards the end of that process meant the document wasn't adopted the first time around. There were then some minor amendments made to the document, and it was adopted last year, 2020. And some long-standing committee members then took a bit of a step back because that was, the last thing that some of those people wanted to have sorted is the modernisation of the club's constitution. And then they were happy to take a step back and hand over the reins to some new people. So I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but the long and short of it is that after a period of time, a significant cohort of the club's membership were dissatisfied with the performance and behaviour of some of the new management committee members.
I'm really disappointed that you said you weren't going to get into the nitty-gritty. That's where it sounds like a lot of the fun resides.
And it is, and I suppose that's me being somewhat
polite,
but also, cognizant, as I mentioned at the outset, that I probably don't have the full picture. And if I was to present just the, and for what it's worth, the people with whom I've been liaising are quite happy for me to put that to them and say, look, I'm going to give you guidance and advice based on what the Constitution says, and we understand that really well because we worked with you to prepare it. But I'm not going to get involved in the he said, she said, and nitty gritty. Yeah, because I'm only getting your side of the story. So they are abundantly aware that that's our position, and
it's funny every time we are involved where we get that other side, you kind of go, oh, so much falls into place because in everyone or inside everyone, their internal narrative is right. And they then say, we interpret the same, as you said, the truth, that third perspective.
Third side of the story.
Yeah. But they interpret it based on their own narrative internally. Yep. And so it's so interesting how the same facts can be interpreted to mean polar opposite things in life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we see that so often because people are complicated beings and often make things more complicated than they need to be too, particularly in a somewhat politically charged environment like a sporting club.
I like how you
So
say often rather than usually.
yeah, yeah, most of the time. So, like I say, around 25% of the club's voting members signed a written request for a special general meeting. And
25%.
yeah, so a serious proportion of the club's voting members. You know, we're not just talking about scratching the bottom of the barrel to get people to sign this, you know, often referred to as petition, but, you know, formally under the Constitution, a written request for special general meeting. And there were some steps that were missed, overlooked, not done entirely correctly in terms of the wording of that proposed the request for special general meeting. So there was, you know, the removal of office bearers en masse, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But also, you know, the wording of the request said we want to kick the committee out, and then we want to appoint an interim committee. Now, if a number of management committee members are removed from office and some management committee members remain, in most cases under club constitutions, the appointment of replacements to those casual vacancies created by the removal can take place at a management committee meeting. So the committee can appoint people to positions that in which casual vacancies are created. However, if the members put people into those positions in which casual vacancies are created, that can really only happen by election at a general meeting. So there was some intricacies of the wording of the request for special general meeting that weren't entirely accurate. And, you know, they'd already kind of had people signing that request before they came to us and asked about the wording. So that kind of led to some disagreement down the track with the incumbent management committee. But more importantly, a point to note here is that under most constitutions in Queensland for incorporated associations, the management committee has the power to interpret the meaning of that constitution. And if there's any disagreement between what the management committee think the meaning of a clause is and what the members of that club think the meaning of a clause is, the Office of Fair Trading, or the regulatory body in our case here in Queensland, the Office of Fair Trading, aren't going to adjudicate. They're not going to act as an arbiter, and you're going to have to go and deal with that dispute at the Supreme Court. So needless to say, the agreement was, yeah, we're not going to have that fight, because the meeting has been called by the meeting was called according to the timeline set out in the Constitution. Interestingly, the management committee disagreed with the interpretation of the clause in the Constitution relating to the removal of a management committee member from office. And while the petitioners, we'll call them, requested a meeting with the purpose of removing all members of the management committee from office, the management committee interpreted that particular clause in the Constitution differently and said, well, we are going to have this meeting because you've requested it, but we're going to consider the removal of each management committee member individually. And the petitioners, you know, they kind of said, look, well, we didn't want it to get personal, and we didn't want to consider each individual management committee member and their removal one by one. We just wanted to consider it en masse and remove the management committee members, and then, you know, consider the re-election rather than appointment by the members of people to those casual vacancies of an entire committee. That's right. So,
but we wanted to air the dirty laundry of the committee as a whole,
yep,
not of the individuals on that committee.
Yeah, that's right. And there's some intricacies there, because there was a concern amongst some of the members of the club, so non-management committee members. There was a concern amongst members or petitioners that some of the management committee members, even one, might remain, and that they, under the Constitution, would then have the power to appoint the same people back to the
Right,
management committee.
Okay. Yeah.
So there was disagreement regarding the interpretation of the Constitution, and our advice was really the management committee has the power to make those interpretations, and really you've got to just kind of suck it up, turn up to the meeting, and let the collective voice of the membership make the decision. Once the meeting was called, there was toing and froing between this group of members, the petitioners, and the management committee. And that really centered on how this meeting was going to be facilitated. And the management committee chose their facilitator. They called it a facilitator rather than a chairperson.
Mhm.
And under the club's constitution, the members have the power to appoint a chairperson in the event that the president is unable or unwilling to chair the meeting. And in this case, it certainly wouldn't have been appropriate for the president to act as the chairperson of that general meeting, because there was a motion before the meeting, or there was to be a motion put before the meeting for his removal from office.
They are an interested party.
Exactly. So to the committee's credit, they did appoint someone other than the president to run the meeting. However, that was contradictory to the provisions of the Constitution, which say that if the president's not going to run it, the members shall elect a chair from someone present. And then there was discussion about how debate would be managed during the meeting. And the committee made it clear that they wouldn't be entertaining any debate whatsoever, and that each of these individual motions to consider the removal of office of management committee members individually one by one would be essentially
and voted on straight
put
away.
and voted on. That's right. And no debate whatsoever shall be entertained.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point, because every time we see the shit hit the fan here, and you know how you made a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment about any disputes have to go straight to the Supreme Court.
Yep.
That makes that a rare occurrence, that shit goes to the Supreme Court. But
Yep.
when it does, every case that I can remember in recent history, at least, is due to a denial of natural justice.
Yes.
So what you're saying here is that the committee had said, no, we're going to relinquish our right to natural justice to hear the charges that have been laid against us and to defend ourselves against them in the public forum that's going to ultimately decide our fate, but also deny the petitioners, as you call them, their right to natural justice to be able to say, these are the reasons that we'd like you removed, and then to have the discussion, to have the debate.
Yep, that's exactly right. And we were advising, or I was advising, look, what we often do if we're running a meeting like this is to get the standing orders or the rules according to which the meeting is going to be run agreed at the outset. And it's important to note here, I think, that the members of a club, the members of an incorporated association, are really the boss. The management committee are there to serve the members. They're not there to direct the members. And constitutions and the legislation itself is structured to that effect, that
so the constituents appoint their leaders. The leaders then manage the organisation, lead and manage the organisation on a day-to-day basis throughout the year. But should significant decisions arise, and the one that you've mentioned obviously is the change in constitution, then something like that needs to be decided by the members.
Yeah, that's right. Or indeed, the removal of those, one or more of those management committee members from office, should the general membership or a significant proportion of them feel that the management committee aren't performing in the best interests of the club.
So are we ready to get into what happened when the meeting came about?
So at the meeting, the standing orders were not agreed at the outset, and it won't come as a surprise to you to hear that there was a lot of nasty commentary being made by members present. And one of the petitioners really pushed the issue and said, look, you've gagged us as a membership, and you've said that we can't debate these motions, which really contradicts standard meeting procedure. And essentially stood up and, that person said their bit anyway. And I think ultimately that the management committee during the meeting fell on their own swords by denying the members the opportunity to speak up and for constructive debate to take place, which is certainly what we were recommending should be allowed to happen. And the vote was taken on each of those individual management committee members' removal from office, and in each case it was carried that that member should be removed. It was in some cases pretty close, so that really highlights the fact that democratic process did eventually get seen at the club and during this meeting. So some members felt that the management committee members should remain in office, and other members felt that they should be removed from office. and ultimately the people who thought they should be removed, there were more of those voting during the meeting, and the committee were removed in their entirety. What's interesting to note, though, is that there was some confusion around the secretary position. So in Queensland, the secretary of an incorporated association may be a management committee member, or they may be a non-management committee member who is appointed. And that may be a member of the club, or it may be someone external. So it could be you or I, Mick, who could act as the secretary of an incorporated association if we were to be appointed to that position by the management committee. So given the earlier resignation of the secretary of this club, one of the other management committee members had been appointed to that position of secretary. So the management committee's interpretation, and this wasn't, as I understand, really explored openly at the at the special general meeting, but there was kind of just this position taken that the secretary would carry on in that position, even though that same person had been removed from their management committee position. They would carry on at essentially a caretaker role so that they could continue to pay wages and, sign documents on behalf of the club in the period between that special general meeting and the meeting, which is coming up next week, at which elections will be held to fill the management committee positions.
So at the first meeting, what proportion, you said that 25% of voting members signed the petition or the request to call the SGM. What proportion of voting members attended that meeting?
There were around 50% of the club's members there.
Wow.
Yep.
Oh, well, it obviously shines a spotlight on the fact that this was a hot topic that enough people cared about.
Yeah, that's right. And again, democracy in action. What I think is a really positive point to highlight through this story is that members were activated on both sides of the fence, and they turned up and exercised their democratic right to have a say within the club's operations, which is great. So there were some interesting pieces of correspondence that were distributed by the management committee in the lead up to the meeting. And really, I'm going to use the word propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
So a bit
politics.
And a bit of fear mongering too. If all of us are kicked out, then this club's going to have to operate with no committee. There will be no one to pay wages. There'll be no one to manage golf. So there were some untruths in there. I'm very happy to be open about that because I saw some of the correspondence, and there was stuff in there that was simply untrue and appeared to me really just to be, scaring members into a position where they'd turn up and vote the proposed motions down.
Yeah, but that's good stuff to put in. If it is truly propaganda, it's good stuff that's open to interpretation, and it's just got to sound truthy enough.
Yeah, well, yeah. Look, and as we keep saying, the same thing happens come local, state, and federal elections, doesn't it? The black and white ads. Do you really want this person running your country? So, a fascinating experience for us, on the sideline, and once the management committee were removed from office, the channels of communication between members of the club and us kind of remained open, and it was looking for some time like we might need to go and run the meeting and have some objective involvement in the chairing of those elections to take place at that next general meeting next week. However, one of the long-standing members of the club, and I believe a patron, has been earmarked as the person who will run the meeting and is managing the nomination process and so on. So even though that's someone from within the club's membership, there is a degree of impartiality and objectivity there because that individual, as I understand, has not really had much involvement through all of this nonsense that's gone for the past sort of 6 to 8 weeks. So this is a really interesting example of a management committee to some extent going rogue, I think, forgetting that they're there to serve the club's membership rather than to direct them. And I suppose if I put myself in the position of one of those management committee members, I would hope that firstly, I'd be there in the best interests of the club. And if there appeared to be a groundswell of dissatisfaction against my performance or the performance of my counterparts on the management committee, that I'd say, well, yeah, let's let democratic process, take place, and let's have this meeting. And if the members decide that they don't want me in this position, that's fine. But unfortunately, as we see so often, the motivations for people to be involved in a management committee, and we've covered this in a previous podcast episode, aren't always as noble as they appear on the surface.
Yeah, but even you'd hope that you'd be self-aware enough to say, hang on a minute, there's dissatisfaction with my leadership, rather than before getting to the point of saying, yeah, okay, let's put it to the vote and let's see who votes to keep me and who votes to kick me. You'd engage with your members and say, right, so obviously your expectations of my leadership differ from the way that I'm delivering on those. How can I serve you better? What are your needs? Go and freaking engage.
Yeah. So that really brings us then to some takeaways that I suppose have clarified in my mind over the past few weeks. Before I jump into those, though, have you got any questions or comments that you want to add in?
Yeah, two actually, and they're probably a little benign. The first one is why organisations go through the process of updating their constitution in the first place. Now, if there are obviously glaring inaccuracies to it, then it shouldn't have passed. It shouldn't have been adopted in the first place. It shouldn't have passed regulatory approval. But sometimes they do, and it's not necessarily blatant things that sneak through. It's things that that just lie dormant. They're those the dragons that are just lurking behind corners that jump out at you when you least expect it. So things like, what happens if we've got multiple candidates for election to the management committee at the same time and they all get the same number of votes? How do we deal with that? So it's those things that you'd hope that you could go to the Constitution to find a clear process for dealing with, only to find that it doesn't exist. And so then you find an inaccuracy like that. Other times it's things like arbitrary maximum terms of office for committee members. And, you set, well, you can only serve 8 years consecutively before you've got to have a year off. Okay, why 8? Why not 6?
Because someone who
Why
others
not
didn't
12?
like was at 7.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the timing. And those things, at least once a year, Steve, I'm dealing with resolving those at least once every year. And sometimes it's multiple times a year. All right, we've got a president. Everybody loves her. We want her to stay. She wants to stay, but the Constitution says she has to go. What do we do? And, for organizations, the first one of this year that I'm dealing with is going through a significant transition at the moment in growth. It's all very exciting times, and we've got the chair who has to stand down. So
Absurd.
So it's causing more problems than it's solving. Just because if you really want to kick someone out, you've just spent the last few minutes telling us about exactly the process that you can enact to do that. So bloody do it. But, to take a higher level look at why we would do a constitution, it's to say, let's get the rules in line with reality rather than try and bend reality to fit arbitrary rules that may have been from 40 years ago. It's a different world now. We have different regulatory compliance obligations that are put on us as volunteers. Therefore, we've got to have a constitution that supports us in a contemporary way. So if our constitution holds us back in a business sense, in Queensland, we've just had changes to the law here that mean even if your constitution doesn't say you're allowed to have online meetings, you're allowed to have online meetings. So fantastic. That's really good. But there are things that you don't necessarily realize are holding you back, like the clauses that deal with the keeping of documents, the clauses that deal with your financials that may be archaic and need to go to bring it in line with good business practices and to meet the needs of the humans that run this organization. So don't bend a human to fit a rule. If what's happening is right, then the rules should reflect that, because that's how it's going to support our growth and obviously our long-term sustainability. So that's the first point. The second point is to remind every volunteer why you got involved in the first place. And we've touched on this at a couple of points through the discussion. Firstly, I don't know anyone in any of the golf clubs that we've worked with who got involved in a golf club because they wanted to get on the committee and undermine the operations and the governance of that organization. They all got involved in a golf club because they've got a bag with some golf clubs in it and they want to go and swing them around in some nice green areas.
And they think they can bring something. They think they can improve that club
Well, that's
By
then when
then,
they get onto the committee is what are their motivations for getting
yeah,
onto the committee? Yes, I might have something that I can bring. You touched on the way that those motivations shift. So,
yeah,
the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed politician in any level of government, as you said,
mhm,
and then right down to the petty politics that exists in a tiddlywink society, I want to get involved because either I can see a problem that I want to fix, or I can see growth and I can contribute to that growth. Realistically,
yep,
it's more often I want to get involved because I don't want my club to fold and nobody else is stepping
yeah,
up. I
yeah,
want to get involved because I'm embarrassed sitting here at the AGM. It's been 5 minutes now. Nobody's put their hand up to take on that role. So for crying out loud, I'll just do it.
yeah,
Or I got sucked onto the committee because I was a greenskeeper and people saw that I was committed and I liked talking to people, and then they poached me and took me out of my comfort zone as an operational volunteer and forced me into a package of a governance volunteer where I'm not comfortable.
mm,
So my suggestion, and all the time I talk to people to say, you be connected to yourself to understand your motivation for getting involved in the first place, and then to take a critical look to see why you're still there. Are you
mm,
still there because you're that bright-eyed, bushy-tailed politician who can see growth and can see potential? Or are you just digging your heels in now? Have you been there long enough? And are you just
yeah,
defending a position that was great in 2007, but isn't so good in 2021 because the world has changed through two massive shifts in
yep,
that time? We've seen two massive economic shifts in a bit over a decade that is unusual for us to have this level of turmoil. So are you stuck in ways that aren't going to fit in a contemporary world?
Synergistically, the Associations Incorporation Act here in Queensland has been reviewed twice since then as well, once in '07 and once last year. So
Mm.
a lot has changed in the real world. A lot has changed in the world of volunteer associations. And as you say, sometimes people should move on. And it shouldn't be the Constitution that arbitrarily enforces that, but the members should. Well, I mean, that person hopefully should recognise that it's time for change. But if not, the members have got every right to make that decision.
So what you're saying, Steve, is that the Associations Incorporation Act in Queensland caused the GFC and coronavirus. That's what I'm hearing here, dude.
Yeah. Wow. Hey,
So
you should be a conspiracy theorist.
how can clubs make sure that they don't fall into the same traps as this lovely golf club?
Okay, so I've got a few takeaways. When you've got significant issues, significant disputes in your club, it may well be appropriate to engage objective, impartial, and potentially external support. So that doesn't necessarily need to be someone like us. It might be, as is the case at this club, someone who's had long-term involvement, is a patron of the club and really cares for the club's long-term success, and therefore is going to get in and do, or hopefully will do what's best for the club's future, rather than just for what's best for one side of the story. So engage some impartial support. Next, you touched on this yourself. Don't engage in keyboard wars. Bloody engage. We're all adults. We should be able to engage in a mature manner. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And you've run general meetings where you've really had to pull people up, and you've set standing orders really clearly, or you've asked the meeting to set standing orders at the outset so that everyone's abundantly aware of the rules according to which that meeting's going to be run. And if people step out of line, they can be pulled back into line by the meeting.
Yeah, by the rules, but it's nothing personal.
Exactly.
Then it's the
Yep.
rules.
And remember that the members are the boss of your club. Management committees are there to serve, not to direct. And indeed, we don't call them directors.
Servant leadership.
Yep. Yeah,
Isn't it?
that's
Yeah.
right. So, and your club does have within its constitution provisions for democratic process to take hold. And
Yep.
this is one that's going to come to mind during the discussion, because of the way that the management committee were cherry picking content from their constitution and using little bits and pieces here and there to support their own position. You're gonna bring yourself unstuck if you do that. And ultimately, not sticking to due process was what brought them undone during the meeting, according to the account that I've been given. So apply provisions from your constitution consistently, but also constitutions, like legislation, don't deal in detail with every possible eventuality. Constitutions are written in a way that lends them to some degree of interpretation. So that might mean when nonsense like this happens, your club might need to consider writing into bylaws, and this is the next step for these guys, some more clear meeting procedures. So we'll be working with them to prepare bylaws, and those bylaws will include standing orders for meetings, which can be applied by the chairperson or at the direction of the members present at the meeting. And that set of standing orders should outline standard, commonly accepted meeting procedure. For instance, if a motion's moved and seconded, that debate should be allowed to ensue. How long that debate goes for, and the process for arguments for and against and so on, might differ from meeting to meeting based on the level of complexity or the seriousness of the business to be dealt with at that meeting. But there should be at least the foundation for the rules according to which your meetings are going to be run, because this sort of stuff happens in clubs.
Yeah, and there's just very quickly two ends of the spectrum there. It might be a really simple matter that everybody agrees to and we've got to resolve it. So if that's the case, then put the question, vote, adopt the motion, and then spend your time talking about what you're going to do to implement that decision, rather than spend time about the time on the decision and leave no time for action planning.
Yep.
And on the flip side, it may be a really contentious issue like, I don't know, a motion to remove people from the management committee. Where you've got a process, and our standard standing orders spell this out. It says a speaker for, a speaker against, a speaker for, a speaker against. When you get to the point where there are no more speakers, or where somebody has spoken for or against, and two people have spoken directly one after the other, and there's nobody left to argue the other side, that's enough. It means we've heard from both sides, and now we've obviously got more for one side than the other. Put the question, and that's it.
Yeah. Yep. On that note, you're not going to believe this, but I've just missed a call from the person with whom I've been dealing at this club. So we better wrap up so I can go and call them back.
It's an absolute classic.
Look at that.
Oh, that's a classic. Steve, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really hope, and look, as I said at the start, it's a safari through shitfulness, but not for the purpose of just having a laugh. And, there's more cringes in those sorts of stories than laughs. It's more about understanding that there's always a way to take a reasonable approach. There's always a way to find your way through that shitfulness and come out the other side as a much more sustainable and stronger organisation. So that's exactly what we're encouraging here in the transition from basket caseness to showcaseness in the clubs that we work with. And we'd certainly encourage everyone to take that journey.
Yeah, and learn from your mistakes, because this stuff is going to happen potentially in your club. And if it does, use it as a learning opportunity and build the system or the structure within which you can avoid that same nonsense happening in the future.
Yeah, and psychologically, the thing that we all need to maximize is self-awareness, to keep analyzing our own motives and looking within ourselves, looking in the mirror first and saying, is there something that I could do to make this better, or something that I've done to make this worse that I can now fix, and learn from it, and then go and grow, go and prosper, go and become that showcase club. As usual, Steve, I'd like to encourage everyone, if you haven't already, make sure you visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. Check out some webinars and obviously our podcast recordings there. When you do sign up for our newsletter, you'll see our tip videos that we put together every now and again that are nice, short, succinct little reminders of the sorts of stuff that we talk about here on Basket Case Club.
That we ramble about.
And of course, if you've got any ideas for future episodes or problems that you've faced, let us know. We've got a nice long list of problems that people have let us know about to talk about. But we're very happy to add to that list. And I tell you what, if it's contentious enough or shitful enough, then it'll just
We'll go there. Yeah, we'll safari there.
Thanks very much, Steve. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, Mick. See ya.